Hi. This story is called The Bulldozer, and it's a very, very true story about an extremely difficult and terrifying time. Exactly maybe as some of you are experiencing now during COVID-19. And it's an especially true story if you're being quarantined with children, or almost anyone. So once upon a time, when we, that's my husband and I, were very young and innocent and very new at parenting, we adopted 3 little ones within a very short period of time. I think it was maybe, a year and a half for 3 new kids. So these children had been born to amazingly wonderful, courageous parents who probably, because of their own childhood traumas, were drug addicts. There's no one to blame because these parents had experienced horrific abuse themselves. And therefore, our new children had been through traumas so extreme that our minds couldn't even hold all the stories we had been told about their early childhoods. They were true heroes. Amazing heroes who had been so busy trying to survive that they had almost forgotten who they really were. And so, when these incredible little beings came into our care, all of them were in the throes of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. At least that's what it said on paper. But in real life, in daily life, this meant seizures, for some of them, seizures several times a day because of brain injury. And it meant panic attacks, usually right before bedtime because they were so terrified to go to sleep. And there was also self-injury, which meant hurting themselves in ways no one could even imagine because they were trying to go back and understand and undo the trauma that had happened to them. And oh yeah, there were temper tantrums because they felt that they had lost completely control of their reality. In their minds and in their bodies, there just was no safety. And they definitely were not living happily ever after. They were even burying their food because of earlier times of starvation. And then there were what they called night terrors, nightmares that didn't stop even after the screams woke them and us up. And their eyes were wide open and they were still screaming. And then afterwards, they couldn't remember what they were screaming about. It was just pure terror. So for us, it meant very little sleep, as there was almost never a moment when one of them wasn't in distress. And it meant a level of distress that none of us could possibly have prepared for by reading all those wise books on adoption or all those books about how to kill the monsters. The level of physical and emotional exhaustion was just beyond words or comprehension. But also, unexpectedly, it meant a profound level of love that neither of us had ever even known existed. We had absolutely no idea that we were capable or even wanted to love that deeply. And so tiny victories brought such monumental celebrations. Like I remember our 3-year-old son using red and blue crayons rather than just the black one, which was the only one he had used during his entire life, his entire first year with us. And oh, did we celebrate. And I remember our beautiful 4-year-old daughter covering her entire body, just everywhere, with Band-Aids all over her face to signal her willingness to heal after going through unspeakable abuse? How could we have known that our hearts would break over and over again every day? And how could we have known that our hearts would break open 1,000 times a day? And then there was this other kind of love, a very, very intense mother, father, bear kind of love that alternated from fierce battle mode, ready to risk our own lives and sanity in order to help them slay those monsters. And then, instantaneously, we would shift into a melting, exquisite sweetness as we pulled them into our arms. And then suddenly back into warrior again at the first sound of their cries. We were on red alert 24/7, and it is a miracle that our adrenals still function. Actually, they don't quite, but pretty good. So there was never a time when we were off duty so that we could just have time to integrate all this intensity. It was intensity of love, but it was also intensity of horror over what these children had been through. And it was an intensity of exhaustion. I tell you now that we had absolutely no idea what we'd gotten ourselves into when we so innocently stepped in to save the day. I remember one time when life became so intense that we decided that a change of scenery might help. And so we loaded up the 3 kids, and that in itself is no small feat. And we drove to a friend's home in New England. And did I mention that it was winter? Did I mention that it was winter in Maine, of all places? Or that our friend's new house wasn't built yet? Or that it was below 0 with 2 feet of snow on the ground already? But our dear, dear friend coaxed us there with great stories of building snowmen and creating art and drinking hot chocolate by the fire. Well, the fire turned out to be a wood stove, but it was warm. And the house, well, in fact, it was a 1-room cabin, a very small 1-room, actually. So after only maybe 2 days with the children in this tiny cottage in the snow-covered woods, we had run out of coloring books, and all the marshmallows had been toasted, and the little natives were getting truly restless, even more restless than usual. And I was coming kind of dangerously close to the end of my proverbial rope. And since I was young and still in my begging stage with God, I prayed deep and long, asking God to please, please give me patience. And after the prayer, I felt so much better. And I went to sleep that night, certain that I would wake up into delicious calm. The sun would be shining, the snow would be melting, and we would take a trip into town to get new coloring books. And don't forget the marshmallows. And we would go to the cafe and have their amazing apple pie. So imagine my surprise, perhaps shock would be a more honest word, when I awoke and I looked out the window and I felt the most intense rage I had ever experienced in my life. I was stunned. Hadn't I prayed for patience, for love, for sunshine and melting snow and marshmallows? But even I appreciated the very dark humor of noticing that the sun was not shining and the snow was not melting. In fact, it had snowed another 20 inches overnight, on top of the 2 feet of snow we were already there to enjoy. And of course, we were snowed in probably for the next week at least. in our enchanted cabin that was getting smaller and smaller by the moment. So I was determined not to take it out on my sweet children or my beloved husband, who was still sleeping innocently. So I pushed my rage aside until I tiptoed out the door. And then I began kicking my way through almost 4 feet of snow, which isn't easy, by the way. And suddenly I heard myself. There was no intention. I just heard myself screaming at God, "What are you doing, God? What could you be thinking?" But luckily, blessedly, God answered my prayer quickly before I went totally insane. It didn't take more than 3 seconds for the answer to come echoing through my mind and settling deep down into my heart. And God, or whatever you want to call her, said, "I am bulldozing out everything inside you that does not match your prayer for patience." You've got to be kidding. Now, 40 years later, my concepts of divinity and my understanding of prayer even have radically changed. But the message hasn't changed at all. Sometimes, often, love is just like that. It feels so good to love and to be loved. But love is more than feeling good. It is a magnificent healing force. And in fact, it is the strongest medicine possible. Therefore, when you say a sincere yes to love, it will probably bulldoze everything to the surface of your life that does not match that vibration of love. Just as fasting often allows one to gather enough strength to push the offending toxins out of the body, well, being in the presence of love often starts a detox of sorts. I first noticed this detox reaction when I opened my nonprofit called the Radiance Center. I saw that sometimes, just from participating in a gathering, all of a sudden people would begin an automatic release of whatever kept their energy, their life force, their joy from flowing freely. Sometimes it would be a physical detox, such as suddenly feeling sick, or an old illness or chemicals leaving the body because they did not match wholeness. Or sometimes it would be an emotional detox when old fears and angers suddenly rose up to be released, not always so sweetly. I still see that happening here even. Every time we gather together in the name of love, the bulldozer comes to help us take out the garbage. Whatever comes up after you have allowed yourself to hope, to dream, to pray, don't panic, or do if you want to, but know that the bulldozer is on your side. The bulldozer is always an answer to your prayers. It arrives to carry away anything that gets in the way of wholeness. So if you pray for love, sincerely, your sense of unworthiness will arise to show you how you have felt like you have not deserved that love. And if you pray for prosperity, and I've seen this happen twice in my life, your beliefs about poverty will wipe out your bank account. Or if you pray for patience, even while being quarantined, your anger will arise to be transmuted. So whatever form your bulldozer assumes, try to welcome it graciously. Hopelessness and despair? No problem. Old pain and trauma? Why not? Loss? Because we are all losing loved ones, and we are all losing life as we have known it at this very moment in history. Of course, it wouldn't be showing up in this moment if you hadn't invited wholeness, if you hadn't decided to be born into this time of transformation. And on a much larger canvas, our world wouldn't be unraveling if we collectively hadn't invited the next evolution of humanity. So make friends with your bulldozer. Bow namaste. I salute the God in you, bulldozer. And the moral of the story? Truly sincere prayers are extremely potent medicine that signify to your soul that you are really, really ready to be transmuted, transformed, upgraded. So if you ask for something, make certain that you really want it. And then trust that whatever comes in response to that prayer is your friend, your ally. Blessings and love to each of you. May you be willing to be bulldozed. In fact, you must be, or you wouldn't have chosen to come into life during this pandemic. Therefore, no matter how difficult, no matter how terrifying, no matter how much loss, remember that no matter what is happening, this is your answered prayer. Thank you.